and life be meaningful without God?
First, let me define what I mean by meaningful. It is to have a purpose, to have a function in your short life, to question if your life has an important impact. What follows from having an impact and a purpose in this sense is for your life to be lived for a reason greater than yourself, however that looks like. An example is, if you serve in the army, you fight to protect your country for its safety, peace, and longevity. That is a purpose in life greater than yourself. You could train to be a doctor to help those that are sick, an architect or a builder to design and build homes for the purpose of protection from the weather and from dangers that live on the outside. Another is simply starting and raising a family with an average job. You get the picture. But here's where it gets interesting. What I mentioned are some good qualities that do benefit people in the here and now. The reality is, however, there is an unfortunate opposite. Whilst this is beautiful to help give an orphan a life by taking him into your fold for his protection and provision, let's think about why we got orphans in the first place. Well, there are many reasons. Parents passed away. Parents gave the child up due to being unwanted because of unpreferred gender, disability, or poverty. Child abuse in its many forms, whether verbal, physical, or sexual, and the list goes on. Those, what I described, are terrible realities that happen to this day. Kids also get kidnapped, trafficked into prostitution, and recruited into gang life. What I mentioned is only the tip of the iceberg of evils. Why did I bring them up? Because for the purpose of this topic, one's life meaning has an underbelly in its subjectivity, that is, moral standards. Those descriptions of evil that take place in the real world are performed by people who live out their subjectively meaningful lives however they see fit. So on one hand, we got those who go out their way to do good by becoming doctors, builders, volunteers, etc. And the other, we got those who perform inhumane acts on others to get something out of it. Maybe years ago you have watched that video called 4 Guys, 1 Hammer. Curiosity got the best of me when clips on YouTube were popularizing the video via people's reactions to it. Whilst I'm not traumatized by it, it does speak clearly from a first-person camera perspective of the horrors mankind is capable of, and they looked to have enjoyed it too. When a child gets recruited into a gang, they are typically exposed to unaliving, torture, rape. The cartels have a culture of death, because what they want to achieve is done usually by brute force. With time, these young recruits have their minds numb to the horrors they see with what they get involved in. They get used to excessive violence, albeit others get PTSD. Cartels seem to have little problems making hitmen out of children. The question is though, whilst we both agree that what they're doing is outright wrong, it is how these outlaws want to live their lives. It is subjective. They are the masters of their own destiny, so to speak. A question to consider is, who are you to say that these gangs shouldn't live that way? Notice too, I'm not saying all gang members are like that. Being one who is stuck on the same boat of opinion how these types of people live their lives is only a matter of preference, much like how you have your eggs in the morning. Not of downright condemnation, otherwise that would be a violation of a person's moral relativity. Subjective meaning in life only takes us so far. Eventually, these subjective meanings that each individual creates and holds dearly to clash, in some cases overlap, so long as here's the key, no harm is done. Adolf Hitler wanted to create a super race of pure Aryans. He murdered millions of Jews that he thought was getting in the way of his plan and were considered detrimental and parasitical to German and European communities all over. He wrote in Mein Kampf, with satanic joy in his face, the black-haired Jewish youth lurks in wait for the unsuspecting girl, whom he defiles with his blood, thus stealing her from her people, With every means, he tries to destroy the racial foundation of the people he is set out to subjugate. Just as he himself systematically ruins women and girls, he does not shrink back from pulling down the blood barriers for others. Even on a large scale, it was and it is Jews who bring the Negroes into the Rhineland, always with the same secret thought and clear aim of ruining the hated white race by the necessarily resulting bastardization, throwing it down from its cultural and political height, and himself rising to be its master. He also wrote, "The end is not only the end of freedom of the peoples oppressed by the Jew, but also the end of this parasite upon the nations. After the death of his victim, the vampire sooner or later dies too." In his 1941 speech to the Reichstag, he was unapologetic about what he intended to do. He said, "Today I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside of Europe should succeed in plunging nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and this the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." Hitler also had a eugenics program that murdered hundreds of thousands of disabled children, adults, and elderly people for the betterment of mankind. In other words, he had a vision for the future. He tried his best to carry it out. He made it his life's purpose to take mankind forward in his image. Disgusted are you? Do you also think it's right to unalive disabled babies in the womb? 2024 has a different kind of mass unaliving. The results of Hitler's accomplishments, as formerly mentioned, were nothing short of horrendous, to say the least. The clash of ideologies with other world powers resulted in a world war. What does this mean? In my opinion, there is a meaning above our own personal ones that we carve out for ourselves. There are some things wrong and some things right. We cannot simply go about doing whatever we want to if it leads to the harming of others. That is a dilemma if our meaning in life is subjected to one's opinion, but are unable to objectively condemn others' actions, especially if they don't really affect us or are happening halfway around the world. Anton LaVey put it like this in his book, The Satanic Bible: "Do as thou wilt, that is the whole of the law." If the meaning of life is subjected to each individual, even from the most primitive perspective, that is, to simply pass on our genes, or as Morgan Freeman put it in the movie Lucy, pass on our information. What is a good philosophical reason to stop us from doing wrong if we want to and can get away with it? We have to go further back by asking, what are we here for in the first place? If the Big Bang was a random event leading up to the intelligibility of a life whose creatures are now self-aware, able to question our very existence, contemplate, reflect, and investigate, looking for clues towards knowing what our purpose in life is, then perhaps the origin of our universe isn't so random after all. We know from reason an explosion just doesn't happen. There has to be the right conditions to be met for an explosion to go off like a bomb or a gunshot. Books don't form through an explosion in the printing press. The creation of a bomb and gun require a mind to put those pieces together. Me as a layman can only say so much about the subject of the Big Bang before getting way out of depth. However, it is something that we're all taught to understand in our school education, even if it's on a basic level. If our origin came from a random event, then the cosmos sure had a way of making a joke out of the situation, because now we're at a point where we can question the universe from whence we came. The late Carl Sagan had his view on the matter. The universe's order is, order was, and order ever will be. That sounds depressing. Michael Shermer said this: "Play hard, work hard, love hard. The bottom line for me is to live life to the fullest in the here and now instead of a hoped for hereafter, and to make every day count in some meaningful way and do something, no matter how small it is, to make the world a better place. The words he used in this quote do not account for how we ought to live our subjective lives if there is no uncaused first cause intelligibility behind it. What does living your life to the fullest mean? There's the same beautification of carefully put together words applied to people like Jeffrey Dahmer. He thought if there is no God, he could do what he wanted. One of them being unaliving people and cannibalism. No, they don't. Otherwise, there would perhaps be no interference. Why does making the world a better place even matter? Such advice can be ignored if a person so chooses. Yes, Michael can make an impact in the world for the better, and I commend him for his efforts. He can do charity work, help old ladies across the streets, etc. Very good. But it does not mean any of us should follow suit. Giving our hard-earned money to the poor or risked our lives for strangers in a burning fire. Which leads to another interesting thing. If our subjective ways of living came from a random origin, without direction, meaning then that this is the only life we got for however many short years, why put your life on the line for the sake of others in the first place? It would make more sense to not put yourself in harm's way for others when trouble comes. Funnily enough, though, we are sacrificial creatures. We do irrational things that could otherwise be avoided. A soldier does not have to jump on a grenade to protect his comrades. A father does not have to fight off a wild animal to protect his children. It makes more sense to run off, to get to safety, and when ready, start over with producing another family. Animals like lions, cats, and dogs sometimes eat their young. Certain birds kill their deformed offspring. Humans neglecting their responsibilities for self-preservation is no different. But these types of people who run away from danger by making logical decisions that make more sense for the preservation of their own lives get called out. A soldier who runs away from battle is a coward, a lowlife, traitor, unreliable, and unworthy of respect. A father who lets his kids get eaten by a wild animal to buy enough time for himself to get to safety would get absolutely destroyed by even the seemingly harmless criminals in prison, despite doing what they thought makes sense. Another thing before we do something that appears wrong, like running away from the battlefield or running away to protect your life from a bear whilst it's eating your kids. Our minds sound an alarm telling us we should not do X, Y, and Z. And if we still go against our conscience, we become guilty and regretful. On the opposite end of the spectrum of subjective meaning comes objective meaning, that being independent of one's own opinion. The ultimatum in a theist sense is a higher power created you for a purpose. God created us for having a relationship with Him as we share in His divine nature for all eternity. That is Christianity in a sentence. Of course, what draws from that are lots of questions and concerns, but for the sake of this video, I want to try my best to stick to the topic of meaning, and if I go off the rail a bit, I apologize. So far, we dabbled into subjective meaning and some of its problems with its grounding in morality. That is, if the purpose in life is subjected to each individual's opinion, then how can we make sense of another person's moral or immoral way of living through our condemnation of their life's choices? Just like if a criminal can get away with his atrocities without getting caught, then he or you to complain. We'd be violating their so-called rights. Rights is another issue for the relativists, by the way. We have to take a step back when looking at morality in order to give an explanation to what makes better sense. If there is a mind behind the universe that made us uniquely aware sentient beings, even made in the image of God, then perhaps we can explain why some things are always right and some things are always wrong. Formerly mentioned earlier, child trafficking, rape, unaliving innocents, and Bob's your uncle. If your meaning in life is objective, or a better word, is discovered, then the response you feel towards evils that are committed, like theft and unaliving, is justified. Criminals should be punished, dealt with appropriately. Yes, you can carry it out as a subjectivist, but what matters most is, are you living consistently? Because, as a subjectivist in the moral sense, there is not enough reason to properly ground some things as wrong and right. If a worldview is impossible to live out, then perhaps it doesn't best explain life itself and should be rejected. Truth is that which corresponds closest to reality, right? If there is discovered meaning, if we are made for a purpose that stretches into everlasting life, and we are to be judged one day, then every decision, thought, word, and deed matters ultimately. Can we have an objective meaning without invoking God? Maybe aliens made us. That's an interesting question. Let us suppose aliens made us. Let's say something like in the movie Prometheus is true. Our composite makers are hiding out somewhere in a distant galaxy. They would have to also have a moral code to live by. They would mirror us in some ways too. Their existence still would not be able to explain objective moral arts. Neither explain the beginning of the universe. You'd have to give good reasons for aliens causing the universe into existence, with its trillions of stars and galaxies. If they caused the Big Bang at all, these alien makers of ours have to create something more powerful than the universe itself and also exist outside of space and time. We would be reaching into the world of speculation, which would make a good sci-fi series, but that looks to be where it ends until further notice. Can we have an objectively meaningful life without the need for living forever? If God created us for a purpose, and that is to have a relationship with Him, whilst participating in His divine nature, then just as God lives forever, so do we. What is the point of living forever if not to live for and with God? What the question seems to suggest is, can we live an objectively moral life without the need for God or some kind of divine being involved in our creation? Much like these, in where God created us and leaves us to do something else. What would then be the point? What would then be objective about our life's meaning if it doesn't involve an eternal but necessary aspect? Because then that would mean we are to be held accountable for our actions in this life to the fullest extent. If we don't live forever, we do a time on earth and then cease to exist, then our evils committed in the world to those various degrees will go unanswered. The cries of justice for the innocents will not be met. Evil will go unpunished as though they've done nothing wrong. The question, can we live an objectively meaningful life without God, inevitably has to answer for our origins. Let's say we are strictly an unguided, evolved species through evolution by natural selection. It still does not provide a sufficient answer for the origin of our species as a whole. Why do we have life at all? Why are we able to think of metaphysical realities such as right and wrong and meaning itself? Those are philosophical questions that the evolutionary processes that brought us to our current stage of development can answer. If life is meaningless, then we should never have found out we had no meaning. Just like if we live on a planet with no sun, we should never have questions about eyes. Eyes would be without meaning. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis. The question itself becomes nonsensical without falling into subjective meaning or no meaning at all. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in the parable of the madman, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I am looking for God, I am looking for God.' As many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, he excited considerable laughter. 'Have you lost him then?' said one. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' said another. 'Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated?' Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. "Where has God gone?" he cried. "I should tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from our suns? Are we not perpetually falling backwards, sideways, forward in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as though an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and the mightiest of all, that the world has yet possessed, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must not ourselves become God simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whosoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Without God or some mind behind the universe, life makes no sense. We are unfortunate creatures finding ways to pass on time before we go to our graves. Nothing beyond that, we eventually will be forgotten, and to meet an even bitter end for our son. When our sun dies out, you can try to live a meaningful life without God, but will be inconsistent as soon as you invade another's way of living by incidentally appealing to a moral standard without proper grounding. But if God exists and we are made in his image, we have a real purpose for living moral lives, calling people out on their wrong behavior, doing good for others, and preparing for eternity, as all our life's works will be remembered by the one who made us. If God does not exist, then ultimately nothing makes sense. You can carry out what appears to be meaningful tasks in the here and now, but unless you accept the good with the bad, and by that I mean extremely bad, then you're not going to live a true to reality kind of life. So judging from that, the theist who believes in the personal God lives a truer life than the person who does not. Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote, "Without God, everything is permissible. All those great and wonderful things in the long run will appear as obsolete since they have not been accounted for in a sensible way."